Joey from Pretoria, South Africa.
Hey,
Those
hey, how's it
beautiful
going?
white teeth.
There you go.
How are you?
Yeah, doing good. How you doing?
Good. It's such a great honor to have you on. I read your book and I'm flabbergasted. I I dreamed about it last night. I went into my dreams. So you're great. We had Lyndon on a couple of weeks ago. You're great friends with Lyndon. You want to explain how that happened?
Yeah, well, we actually, it goes back to your website. Originally before when I was looking at doing the Dakar, and I was, you know what it's like, when you're ever dreaming of those kind of races, you're all over the internet trying to find as much information as you can. And I came across his whole thread, and so I read the whole thread to his first Dakar. I think it was 2013, and it was fantastic. And I was like, oh, this is great, following it all through, and about his forks breaking at Dakar and all that stuff. It was super cool. And and then I messaged him and asked him a couple of questions, leading up to Dakar, just a couple of technical things, and he was kind enough to reply and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then the next thing, we met one day in the bivouac at the 2017 Dakar Rally, and we got chatting and stuff, and we were both doing the Dakar Heroes thing where we got the little GoPro cameras and stuff. And so our stories kind of crossed there, and we spoke a lot, and at the end and things, and then we went our separate ways. And the next thing, he's coming up to Africa, and he came and stayed with me for quite some time, and we did some riding in Lesotho and Swaziland, and had some fantastic trips together, and got to know him really well. It was good.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. So you're South Africa born and raised. You grew up
Actually
riding.
not. Actually not. I was born in the UK, and we
Oh,
moved here when I was 5. So I mean, I've
oh,
spent 40 years here. So I'm very
yeah,
much South African, but
yeah.
originally born in the UK.
And you grew up riding BMX bikes and mountain bikes, but
Yeah.
no motorcycles.
No, never. I mean, I rode a motorcycle for the first time when I was like 16, and it was a friend's one, and we went riding in what we call the bush, in the veldt, which would be like the savannah, I guess, would be what you guys would call it. And I managed to hit an anthill and go over the bars, and that was my official introduction to bikes. But then it took me until I was 26 before I bought my very first, motorcycle that was mine.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of an unusual story. A lot of the best racers don't they grow up riding motocross and so on and get it in their bones early. But at 26, you were already married.
Yeah.
And did you have any kids by then?
Yeah, I think I had 2 by then, and by the time I was 28, I had 4. So 4 daughters, yeah.
4 daughters in 5 years, right?
That's it. It's a talent. You got to use it.
Yeah. So what happened then? You got the bike when you're 26. You
Yeah.
start riding out in what I would call the savannah. And then what happens?
Yeah, started riding and just enjoying this whole motorbike thing, and it just really clicked for me. I fell in love with dirt bikes straight away, and it was, I liked the idea of motocross, and so I was at the track every weekend, riding motocross, and just loved it. And then I got into a bit of freestyle motocross, which was a lot of fun. But I thought, you know what, this is a little bit dangerous, being a dad and all that, and maybe I should steer more towards the off-road. And started racing more enduro and off-road races and that kind of stuff, and started doing pretty good in local championships and stuff. And suddenly you're chasing these little championships, but in the back of my mind, I'd heard about this race, the Dakar Rally, and I was like, yeah, that's the biggest, baddest race, and that's what I want to do. And so I started working towards this goal of racing Dakar. That became the plan.
And were you were pretty fit at the time, right? Didn't you run marathons and even some ultras or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in my 20s, I got into running a bit, quite a bit, I should say. And yeah, ran some marathons and ultra marathons, and did a lot of hiking and swimming and mountain biking. Enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and your wife, you really married up, I have to tell you, from what I read in your book. Your wife Meredith, what was she thinking as you were off, racing these races before the big accident?
Yeah, she used to love it. We used to go together, and she'd come to the races with me, and you know, we're very different in personalities. You know, especially when I was a lot younger, I was like hyper competitive, and you know, you line up at that start line and you're like, I'm going into that first corner, you know, we're getting the whole shot here, no matter what, elbows out, let's go. And she was more, you know, totally chilled and stuff, but she got into it and she'd be cheering me on, and I'd come in at the end of a lap and she'd be like, there's 4 riders ahead, go, go, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So it became a bit of a thing we do together. Sometimes we'd bring our daughters with as well. And it became one of those, you know, became one of those kind of, I guess, biking families where you go out on the weekend and, you know, you're around dirt bikes.
Yeah, that's really great. And you had your own small business, which didn't make you a rich man, but provided for your family. You got a home and provided for your daughters and everything else. And
that's it. And paid for bikes.
And paid for bikes. That's a lot. And yet, even back then, you were eyeing this huge, expensive rally, the Dakar Rally.
Well, I mean, at first, you don't know it's expensive. You know, you just see the super cool race, and you're like, that would be fantastic. And then you start looking it up, and you start seeing stuff, and you go like, whoa, this is insanely expensive. You know, like it's out of reach. There's no ways. It's impossible.
Yeah. So then there's a fateful race. Meredith gets to watch the whole thing, and you had your crash in the first corner with the elbows out, trying to get first to the corner. You don't remember it, probably, thankfully. Can you describe the aftermath and what you think happened?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people about the day, so you know, the good idea, you know, how it all played out. But, you know, I stood on that start line. I was lying second in the championship, second last race of the season. I know if I win that race that I can win this championship. And you know, for guys that race, you know what it's like. You stand on that start line and the red mist kind of comes down and you're all in. And that flag dropped and I just went for it into that first corner, and there was a big pile up in the first corner, and you know, a guy actually crashed into the back of me, which sent me off and caused riders to pile up, and landed on the top of my head and shattered, you know, 12 of my teeth and down into the gums, and was unconscious. And when I came around, I'm suddenly just looking up at the sky. There's heads looking down. I don't even remember starting the race. And I realized my legs were bent and they were leaning against someone, and that person stood back and my legs just fell to the ground. And I just said to the medics, I said, I can't feel my legs. There's nothing there. And there was a lot of complications that day. I ended up lying there in the dirt for about 3 hours. And then I was transported by road to 3 different hospitals over the next 48 hours. And ended up at the Med Spinal Unit in Pretoria, where they basically said to me, look, you're paralyzed. You've broken your T8, T9 vertebrae right off the ribs, crushed the vertebrae, crushed the spinal cord, and you're paralyzed from the chest down. And it's very unlikely that you'll ever walk again or feel your legs again. And this is kind of the deal you've been dealt.
So the arms were okay. You didn't have any problems with the arms?
Just below my chest, yeah.
Just below your chest. And then they gave you an option they gave you some surgical options that you and Meredith had to face. And
there was
tough
really tough decision, because the days ticked away and I got no feeling, no movement back, and my legs just started to get skinnier and skinnier, with all the muscle atrophying, and man, it was tough times, because you suddenly look at the rest of your life and all your dreams, all your hopes, everything you've ever planned for your future just evaporated, just gone. And every day, you know, kind of became a struggle, not only to keep it together physically, but to keep it together mentally. You know, it was tough, and they fused my back at T8 and T9. So they put these screws through and, you know, kind of try to take a lot of pressure off the spinal cord as much as they could. And we ticked along, and then one day I got a little flicker in my big toe. But if I really focused, I could make my right big toe just kind of twitch just a little. And this kind of gave us a glimmer of hope. And we carried on. And then I started to get a little bit of movement in my left ankle as the weeks passed, and then a little bit of feeling in my right quad. But by this point, everything's atrophied. You just got these skinny legs. You got no bum. You got, there's no muscle. It's all just kind of gone. And I mean, along with an injury like this, to be perfectly frank, you lose all bowel control. You lose all bladder control. You lose your ability to digest food properly. It's like there's so many extra complications that people don't think about. And it was incredibly humbling. And the best part of that next year was a lot of time in hospital and rehab and in the wheelchair and things. And it was tough. I was in a wheelchair. I'm missing half my teeth. I'm wearing nappies. I got a bag of urine strapped to my leg. It was tough, man. The way people look at you, the way people treat you was very humbling. Because in my mind, I'm like this tough, fit bike racer dude, and suddenly you're this guy, and it was some tough times.
So, what kind of person goes through that and doesn't give up their Dakar dream? You still had flickers at that time, thinking, they gave me a 10% chance that I could do some partial recovery, and so you just said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do Dakar. That wouldn't be me, I can tell you that.
Well, it was this dream, and it's, I guess the best way to be put it is, when you're in a place like that, you've got two choices. At the end of the day, anything else in these two choices doesn't work. And the two choices are, you're either going to check out, and just end it all, or you're going to live. Not just stay alive, but live. Because if you're going to stay alive, you've got to live. You've got to still chase those dreams and chase those goals and live the fullest, most incredible life that you can. And I decided in that hospital, looking at my wife Meredith and my daughters, that's what we're going to do. We're going to live. We're going to still chase our dreams. We're going to chase our goals, whether I spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair or not. We're going to keep going. And I think about that Dakar dream. And in the beginning, I was like, nah, it's just not possible. But there's no way. And then you're like, but what if? Can you imagine if we came from this back to there? That would be, man. That would be epic. I've got to. And I decided in that hospital that we're gonna chase that goal. And it wasn't like I've got to be honest there, that it wasn't a case of that every day I was like this machine that was like working hard and chasing goals and that. I mean, there were days like that, but there were also nights that I'd lie in that hospital, just alone in the dark at night and just cry. It was so difficult to face that same challenge every single day again and again. And then the other stuff you start to realize that you won't be able to do, and the other challenges. But each day we got up again and just pushed a little more, pushed a little more, pushed a little more.
Yeah. So how long was it before you figured out how to walk? Paul, you might want to play that video now of Joey trying to walk. I mean, how did that work? How long did that take? Yeah,
it's I get asked that fairly often, and it's hard to say like when you walked, because it's like, well, what do you consider walking? I started off with braces on my legs, which held my legs straight, and like a big like kind of chest brace that held my back straight, and I'd stand between parallel bars and kind of swing my legs through and stuff like that with very little control. And slowly but surely, it was months that passed, and we started to get the braces started to come off, and started to walk with the parallel bars, just kind of inching my way along, and then onto crutches and then onto one crutch, and slowly but surely. But I mean, I'm standing here 13 years now after that, and I mean, I still can't run. I can do a little bit of a funny jog over a few meters. I can't jump. I can't feel hot or cold or pain sensation below my chest. I still have to take medication daily to help me digest food. And to be perfectly frank, I still have to use catheters now, 13 years later. So it's one of those where it's always a gradual thing, and then you kind of reach a stage where it's pretty much as good as it's going to get, and you learn to accept things and you learn to adjust and adapt your life. But it's really kind of like it was a long, slow process.
And excuse me, and you don't sweat from your chest down where the nerve damage was. So when you're riding in Dakar, it's 43 degrees Celsius, it's hot. You're just drinking more and sweating more from the upper body, or
I sweat like crazy from there up because obviously it's trying to keep up. But often if it's a really hot day, obviously I'll wet down my riding pants. When I get to a checkpoint or whatever, and there's water bottles and things like that. So I'll do that. The hardest that it was on a race was actually the Mazuga Rally in Morocco, where we hit 46 the one day, and it was crazy. And I could feel I was overheating, and my nose started bleeding in my helmet. And I couldn't stop it bleeding. I was just, man, it was crazy. And I stood there for a while at a checkpoint, just trying to stop it. And in the end, I was like, this ain't going to happen. And it was one of those where you just shove the plugs up and you put your helmet back on and you just get through the stage, But yeah.
Crazy. So almost 3 years of rehab before you got on a bike again, or was it 2 years, or I don't remember.
It was 2.5 years before the first time I just rode a bike. It was 3.5 years before I actually stood at the start line of a race again. The first time I rode a bike was just in a little piece of felt. I just did a circle of about 200 meters. I mean, when I first got on the bike, I pulled out the kickstart, lifted my leg to start it, and just fell over with the bike still between my legs because I couldn't hold it up. And my mates had a good laugh at me and eventually helped to pick me up. And I rode those 200 meters, and just, for me, not being able to run or jump or do the sports I used to be able to just twist that throttle and just go, that was incredible. And I was like, in my mind, I'm thinking, we can do this Dakar thing, man. We could do this, we could pull this off,
Yeah, you wrote in your book that because it was so far-fetched, that's what made it compelling. You've kind of alluded to that a couple of times here. It's just, I just can't imagine the thought process. My thought process would have been, oh man, I love motorcycling. Because there's this saying that you don't choose your passions, they choose you. And motorcycling clearly chose you. It chose me too. And I've said several times that I don't necessarily want to love motorcycling. I just do, and I can't help it. I just love it and can't get away from it. But I would have seriously thought, well, maybe I should go into photography or something like that instead of motorcycling. But your story is kind of amazing. So where was Meredith at this time when you got on the motorcycle and started dreaming again?
Well, the cool thing is, and I mean, you'll get this, and a lot of the guys watching this will get this as well, is that often your wife doesn't agree with your passion or doesn't understand. They're kind of like, they don't feel the same way about motorbikes as you, but they love you, and they know that that's your passion, and they want you to be happy. And so it is one of those where she understood me, and she understood my need to go and, do these adventures and do this kind of stuff and go and ride my bike and stuff. And so I think for her, as scary as it was, and it was obviously scary seeing me get on a bike again and that kind of stuff, but she saw during especially those first 2 years, all the stuff I couldn't do, all the frustration with this new body and coming to terms with stuff and things. And so suddenly, for me to be able to get on a motorcycle and just twist that throttle and be in the sunshine and be with my mates, she could see what that did for my mind. And so I got to be honest, she supported me right from day one, and she'd take a lot of heat, from people, and old ladies would be like, "Is your husband riding those murder cycles again?"
Yeah, I heard that.
So there was a lot of that, but she understands me, and she supported me, 100% through all these kind of. And the irony was that obviously the motorcycle crash took all this functionality away from me, and that's what caused all my physical challenges. But coming back from it, I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't play sports like I used to and that kind of stuff. But I could ride a bike, and I could ride a bike pretty good. And so it was kind of like the one thing I could still do. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I should mention to everybody that you've got this amazing book out that I bought on the Kindle version from Amazon, but you made the audiobook free during this time of COVID. Thank you. And we'll put a link in later so people can listen to the audiobook. And you narrated the audiobook, and your wife narrated her own pieces. Yeah. So one of the things I thought was so great about the book is, you know, it's one thing to be a great motorcyclist like you are, an adventurer and tough and everything else. But the craft of writing is kind of hard, and story structure and so on is hard. I was in the book publishing industry for a while, and editors would say things like, whether it's a movie or a book, if it's an action kind of flick, the lights automatically went off here. If it's an action kind of flick, there must be a point in the story where the protagonist is at the complete mercy of the villain. Just, you know, and there's no way out. And that's what you have to think of. Bruce Willis in chains, you know, shaking because the evil guy has him. And if you don't have that, the story is just not going to succeed. And your story just kind of naturally had that, but it was so well written. It was and well structured, more than I ever imagined, you know, a normal motorcycle rider could do. Did you have help in structuring the story, or it's just you and Meredith?
It's really fantastic to hear that. First of all, thank you. I often joke that writing the book was harder than doing the race. It was really,
I bet it was.
Man, it was tough, and I would stay up quite literally the whole night, just writing when it flowed, and when it didn't, I slept. But it was, in the beginning, it was so tough because you don't know how many chapters, you don't know where to start, you don't know what to do, and so I just started writing experiences, stories. You know, the Dakar rallies that I did, the off-road races, the things I thought about as a kid that shaped the way I think, and I'd write little things about the family, which I thought was cool, you know, and I just started getting all these stories together.
About, like, for example, how the role of a dad is to embarrass his daughters in the mall.
Exactly that. That is one of your top callings. And then what I did is I started forming it and things like that. And I mean, Meredith, man, it probably drove her crazy because I would be like, come, read this, and then she'd read it, and then, you know, we give feedback. And I had another mate as well called Gigi, and Gigi had written a couple of books that had been published, and he was fantastic. And I would write a chapter and I'd send it to him, and he would reply back and be like, man, this is really cool, I love this. But this other bit here, that's total crap. Take that out. That's rubbish. And he was one of those really honest guys, which was fantastic. And we went back and forth. So he kind of mentored me a lot through it. And yeah, we just kind of hacked our way through it. And it was published, which was fantastic.
And it's your writing and Meredith's writing interspersed with each other. Meredith doesn't have quite as much of a percentage of the book.
Sure.
But she's very emotional and very, well, they use the word vulnerable. I don't really like that because I can't imagine you being a vulnerable person in the sense of, you know, but both of you, you know, were just so honest about things, you know, wearing a catheter and nappies and crying and trying to hold it together in front of the girls and all that kind of stuff. And she was, you know, her emotions were extremely raw. You know, she was scared to death when you were going off to these races. And she wrote that in the book, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah. Man, it was a tough decision because that was one of the things when I started writing it, I was like, you know, obviously, you know, as a guy, you want to write like, and then I did this race and I finished, you know, fourth, and you want to post the results and you want to show them the trophies and you want to make it like a racing book and that kind of stuff. But there was this deeper story of all the personal challenges and the struggles and the coming to terms with stuff and that kind of stuff. And I would write it and I was like, I don't really want to tell people about this, you know, this is a bit embarrassing or this. And Meredith and I spoke about it and we said, look, if we're going to do this, let's be all in. Let's put it all on the table. Let's be an open book with our lives, with what we've been through. Because there are other guys out there that are struggling. There's other guys out there that have things like prostate cancer and that kind of stuff that have to use catheters and stuff. And it's and it's horrible, but it's a reality for me. It's a reality for them. So let's put it on the table and let's talk about it, and let's say, hey man, I'm struggling too. You know what I mean? This is difficult for me as well. And so it was a conscious decision we made to write it that way and just put all of that in there.
I'm glad you did. It makes the book. It just makes it so compelling, even though it woke me up in the night several times dreaming about it. So, Elvis, one of your nicknames was Elvis.
That's it. Yeah, my buddy Neil gave me that one originally, I think, because when I get tired, and especially with riding the bike, your legs get fatigued, and my legs would spasm. They'd jump around like this on the bike. So they would laugh at me because I'd ride whoop, and I'd stop, and I couldn't hold the bike up, and I'd just go, with the bike over, and my legs would be spasming away like this, and so that's where we got the nickname Elvis.
That's so funny. So you did an awful. I mean, even now your legs aren't what they used to be. You can't run and you can't play football, as you would call it, and rugby or whatever. But you did a lot of gym work, but partly because you think that's necessary for racing Dakar, even if you haven't been paralyzed, right?
Yeah.
Is that your point of view?
Yeah, totally. I mean, especially leading up to the race, I was at a big disadvantage, and I knew it. And so I had to go in as prepared as I could. So, I worked out a lot. There was a lot of hours put in, but the majority of my time I spent on the bike. We all know as bikers that, the best way to get fit is time in the saddle. And so I would do multiple day trips to Lesotho, to Mozambique. I did stuff in Botswana. I went up there with Vincent Crosby, who was a Botswanan guy, who raced Dakar the same year I did. And we did one trip where we went through the bushveld. It was fantastic, and we actually raced to a race, did the race, rode back the next day. It was hundreds of kilometers through the Botswana bushveld. And so it was just the majority of the training was just riding.
So then you and Meredith and the four girls went up to a race where a vicious cow came after you, and you got a new nickname.
Yeah,
right?
That was the cowboy one.
I don't know how we laugh about this. We can laugh about it in looking back on it. I guess it's funny, but at the time it must have been just heartbreaking.
Man, at the time it was rough. It was 2014, so 7 years after breaking my back, and I'm working towards this Dakar goal. I've now done a couple of rallies, like local races. There's one called the Amageza Rally, which is a fantastic event we had in South Africa. Sadly, the guy who organized the race died in a gyrocopter crash. But it was an incredible race, the Amageza Rally, and I'd done a couple of those. So I'm getting this navigation experience, this rally experience, and I'm working towards these goals and stuff. And then I did an event called the Pongola 500 up on the border of Mozambique and Swaziland. And I was racing along on this dirt road, doing over
120 kilometers an hour, right?
Kilometers an hour, yeah. And this cow just kind of stood out from behind these bushes, and I didn't even have time to brake. It was really just one of those where it was like boom, and for guys out there that have hit animals and that kind of stuff, you'll know when it happens. You always think, oh, I'll brake, I'll swerve. When it happens so quick, and just boom, just T-boned this cow and just went flying down the track. The bike kind of went into its flank, and I went over the top of it, fortunately. But I was a mess. I'd broken ribs. I'd separated my collarbone from my shoulder. I'd torn open my forearm and exposed the bone in my forearm, and I'd torn the tricep muscle off my elbow. And it was pretty remote, so I ended up lying there for several hours, and then evacuated by road. Couple-hour drive to a hospital in Richards Bay on the coast. Spent a week in hospital there. They operated, back to Joburg, and suddenly, you've been working hard at this goal for 7 years, and suddenly you're back in hospital, and you're back in this terrible place, and you with all these injuries, and it took 6 months of operations and healing, and pins and plates and all the fun stuff that goes with it, and and it was just like, I was like, what am I doing? You know, maybe I just need to give up on this Dakar goal. Maybe I'm just wasting my time. I'm just being foolish. This is, you know, maybe it's time we just, you know, give up on this crazy dream. And it was hard to kind of come to terms with that, because it's my big life goal. It's what I want to do. And suddenly you're facing it going like, yeah, maybe it's time. And so it was tough.
So repeatedly in the book, you say, I got these moments where the doubt talk started to creep in, and I just had to stop it and say, no, you can do this. And that could be when you're off in a race facing an 8-story high dune or whatever it was. But there were times when you just felt like you felt inadequate. And somehow you talked yourself into one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. You know, it was one of those where that was probably the point in this whole thing where, you know, I looked at it and it was like, yeah, maybe the right choice for me as a dad, as a husband, as a person, is to give up this crazy goal. You know, maybe it's, you know, this is the right point to just kind of cut your losses and live with what you got. And it was tough to accept, and it was one of those where I go back and forth, but it's like, man, I don't want to be this guy that quits and stuff. I know I could do this, but no, maybe I can't. And it was a lot of that. And I decided, man, I need to just clear my head. And so I decided I was going to ride my bike all the way to Cape Town from Johannesburg, which is, it turned out to be a 2,600 kilometer journey over 5 days. And I just went and I just rode as far as I could every day, and then slept. And I went down through Lesotho, through the Maluti Mountains, and down through the Drakensberg Mountains, and all these beautiful places we have in South Africa. And I just thought about this thing, and just kind of, you know, went over it in my mind. And I decided, you know what, man, I can go a couple more rounds here, man. I got some fight left in me. You know, I'm not done with this goal. I don't want to be one of these guys that lies on my deathbed and goes, I settled. You know, I had big dreams and goals, but it got difficult, and so I brought them all down, and I thought, no, man, I can do this. So I came back from that trip, and then we were back on for Dakar. You know.
You know, you remind me so much of a guy that I met, another South African. You probably know who he is. I think he's relatively famous, but embarrassingly, I don't. And so what happened is I went to South Africa to run the Comrades Marathon. So
no way.
From Pietermaritzburg to Durban, it was a downhill year.
Correct,
and I learned quickly that when Africans say marathon, watch out. They mean a lot of different things. In this one, they meant 56 miles, not 26.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of training for that. And it was pretty warm, and it's hilly, and it's on the hard surface. It's not an easy race.
Yeah.
And so at the 50-mile mark, I'm not feeling too great, but I'm still running. And I'm catching up to this guy who has high-top shoes on, who runs a marathon in high-top shoes. But I noticed the crowd was really into him. And as I went to pass him, my number was color-coded to show that I was not South African. And he was very friendly. All the South Africans were. I had been in the Zulu bus, you know, chanting Zulu war songs because they adopted me. They had spears and everything. There were all these different buses you could run with. And now I was on my own, and I ran into this guy. He was so friendly, and there was a helicopter hovering overhead. And every time a professional sports photographer or something would take our photos, he'd grab my arm and hold mine arm up with his. And I said, you know, you're obviously somebody very famous in South Africa, and I'm embarrassed. I don't know who you are, an actor or something. And he said, no, football. I think he said he was on the World Cup team, and he was in the penalty box, and he got slide tackled, and it broke his vertebrae his back way up high, and he turned into a paraplegic. So all four limbs became paralyzed.
Yeah.
And
quadriplegic, that would be, yeah. If it's all four, it's quadriplegic, yeah.
Is that, yeah. I don't remember what I said, but anyway. Yeah. So I said, what? And he said, yeah, but I just got a little tingle at the end of my fingertips after, you know, a lot of rehab. I was really lucky because I was well known, you know, playing on the World Cup team, that I got all the best treatment. And I got a little tingle on my fingertips, and that gave us some hope that I could regain at least partial use of my arms. And then I got a tingle in my toes, and after 8 years of rehab, 9 years, here I am. I'm doing the Comrades Marathon. So, and he was at mile 50. It was amazing.
That's incredible.
And it's like,
that's cool.
Yeah, what is this spirit who go through, and a soccer player isn't even really an endurance athlete, who would go through all that rehab and do everything else. And he obviously wasn't too comfortable. It was hard for him to do it. But he was doing pretty well. He was ahead of me. So
fantastic, man.
Yeah, fantastic.
You know what it is? I think with any guys you have, sometimes it's a physical injury, sometimes it's a financial thing, or a victim of abuse, or whatever it is that you've been through. Sometimes you need, I don't think sometimes, I think you always need something to aim for, something that motivates you, something that you visualize in your future that makes now bearable and gives you something to work towards. And so I think that's perhaps a really good lesson there for anyone out there struggling, right now, is to make a goal for the future, make a plan. As bikers, pick a really cool ride you want to do one day and work towards it.
Yeah, it was really amazing. I was so inspired by that, and I thought I'd never hear another story like that. But here I am, face to face with you, and it's just as amazing. So, but a cow wasn't enough. So you had a titanium plate put in your arm and all that, and they nicknamed you Cowboy. And then you go off with Lyndon and do the Eco Challenge, and this time it was a vicious camel, right? And that was just a couple of months ago. And you're hiding your show your left wrist.
Yeah, we still got this one on. So the animals weren't done with me yet, and So I mean, here we are now. We had all these other challenges and stuff, and then we came back, and there was this opportunity to ride with Lyndon on the team races to places, and go over to the Africa Eco Race. And obviously, it's one of those races where having done the Dakar, now there's this original Dakar route through North Africa, and you're like, yeah, man, to do that one as well will be epic. And to do it with Lyndon on a team races to places with 4 other guys, with a bunch of mates in the pit crew, and to have it all filmed, and it was just like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I was like, let's do it. But I thought, man, I've had all my crazy stories. I don't need any more crazy stories. This will be a nice, smooth race. We're going to get through it. It's going to be great hanging out with mates and stuff. And it was tough, and it was a flipping killer race, man. And then on the second last day, we were on a liaison on stage, a tar road. We're doing just over 100 k's an hour. It's a 120 zone in the middle of nowhere in the south of Mauritania. And the camel steps out just right on the side of the road. And there was 4 of us riders together at the time, 2 British guys and myself and Greg Roth, a fellow South African. And I don't remember it all because I was unconscious and I lost that bit. But I remember seeing the camel. That's the last thing I remember. And Greg says that I just swerved slightly and the camel turned slightly, and we kind of shoulder to shouldered, and I went down on the tar road and was unconscious. Greg skied and he hit the same camel and crashed. The British guy to our right, he kind of caught the legs of the camel. So in essence, 3 of us hit the same camel. It was crazy. It was just one of those freak things. And suddenly now we start with a whole nother story of dealing with these things.
Yeah, and that whole other story is kind of amazing because you have to get medevaced out of there, and it's like 6 hours to a hospital or something like that.
Yeah, it was hours and hours. They medevaced me out in the chopper, and then within sort of 15 minutes they landed the chopper, and they transferred me to a ground ambulance. And I think it was a case of that the hospital, the closest hospital was in Senegal, the other side of the border, and I don't think they could take the chopper over the border. So they put me in the ground ambulance, and then we rode this dirt track. It was like it wasn't a road. It wasn't even a dirt road. It was like this ambulance was rocking like this. I remember seeing this drip just hitting the window and the roof kind of thing, hanging above me. And it was hour after hour after hour, and eventually we got So we went through the border. I remember the border guards opening the back of the ambulance and checking passports and stuff. And we got to a hospital in Senegal, a government hospital, and obviously it's dead quiet. By this time, it's after midnight, and I had a lot of pain in my side, and so they were worried I had internal bleeding, and so they wanted to X-ray me. The X-ray wasn't sufficient, so we had to have a CAT scan, and they had this like CAT scan machine from like, I don't know, man, it was one of the first ones made, I think, and they put me on this thing. I was worried I was going to get some kind of radiation poisoning, and they did this CAT scan. And in between this, the paramedic who stayed with me, thank goodness, because he could not. Everyone spoke French, so no one could speak English, but he could speak French and like broken English. So at least I had some kind of communication. And he ended up stitching up my head because I'd torn open my head. So I think he did about 15 stitches or 12, I don't know, something like that. So he stitched up my head.
Well.
Yeah, no, we're all good. But he stitched up my head in the passageway of this hospital, the paramedic, between these CAT scans and stuff. And eventually I was cleared of the internal bleeding at about 5 a.m. And so I hadn't slept now for 24 hours. And then they put me back in the ambulance, and we went to the next bivouac, which was in Senegal. And so we'd moved in the same direction as the race. And we got to the bivouac, and we pulled in at the bivouac at just before 6 a.m. As the bikers are starting to leave. And I mean, I haven't had I had a lot of wounds on my hands and stuff, which hadn't been cleaned or anything yet. And the organizers they said, look, if you ride the last special, because I finished the special from the previous day, I just didn't complete the liaison, the last bit of that liaison, because it was on the liaison. And with the race, you can trailer your bike on the long liaisons. They were cool with that the whole race. And so they said, look, if you ride the last day, you can finish the race. And so I was like, well, if we can finish this thing still, let's do it, And so we managed to. So we had to put a plastic bag over my head to get my helmet on, over the plastic bag, and we cut my gloves and got the gloves on, and Lyndon's dad, he's an incredible guy, and he helped me to get kitted up and stuff, and things, and we got kitted up and lined up, and I went down to the beach to do the last 22-kilometer special, and in my mind I'm just going 22 Ks, that's all I got to do, and the bikes had already left. And so I got to the beach, and there's just cars lined up. And I went up to the marshal, and he was like, it's fine, just start with the cars. And I'm like, so I lined up next to these cars, and I was just like, man, let these guys go. And off they went. And now I'm riding, and I've got torn ligaments in my hand. I got, this cut in my head. I got all these wounds and stuff, and I'm tearing up in my goggles, man. I'm in so much pain, and I don't have a road book. So it's only 22 Ks, but you come off the beach and you make a few turns around Lac Rose. And I'm trying to figure out where to go because the cars just went ahead. And I thought I'll follow the guy who's lost. And the guy who's lost went slower and slower and slower. And then he stops. He's obviously broken down. And now I'm like, now what must I do? So I just rode and just hacked it through those 22 Ks, man. And I got to that finish line, and I stalled the bike because I couldn't pull in the clutch and things. And I just stalled the bike on that finish line. I put my head down, and I just cried, man. I was broken, and sorted myself out, and then took the helmet off, and we went over the finish line with the team, and it was incredible.
That's amazing. And no riders DNF'd that race because you made it, right?
Yeah, out of that team, all 5 of us finished. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so great. I can't imagine what was going through the other riders' minds, although they express some of that in the videos, but people like Lyndon, I mean, nobody expected to see you that morning, right? They didn't know what your fate was. Had you called in or anything?
Yeah, Lyndon, and I mean, can I tell you, I got to give credit to our team, man. We had such a cool team. You met a lot of the riders on the series, and you also met the pit crew. But those pit crew were, man, they were solid guys. And what they did is because my bike was obviously pretty destroyed. You know, I mean, you crashed at 100 into a camel at 120 k's an hour on a tar road. You know, and so your bike's messed up, and they fixed that bike the whole night. And so when I got back there at 6 a.m., that bike was prepped just in case I came back. And so, I mean, that's testament to Lyndon and the team. And, you know, it was so cool that they did that. And that I got to ride that bike, you know.
Amazing. So now we're going to go back in the past a little bit. You'd run into a cow, you're all broken up, you're trying to figure out whether this dream was for you or not, and you and Meredith finally decided, okay, I'm going for this dream. You had to raise $1 million of whatever your currency is in South Africa, I don't remember.
Yeah.
And which seemed unattainable, and you made it to the start line. You know, just that's the part of the book that, I mean, it wouldn't be a book if you didn't do it. That's the compelling part of the story. You made it to the start line. So, and then reading the stage by stage coverage from the inside, the account, the way you write it, you know, when you're so vulnerable and things like that, like the marathon stage and so on, where you're out there that many hours and you've got these trucks and cars coming up behind you. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like in those first few stages?
For sure. You know, something you've said a couple of times in the interviews, you talk about like top riders and good riders and that kind of stuff. And I need to kind of be pretty clear on this, that I'm not a top rider. You know, I'm not a guy like Lyndon and these kind of guys. You know, I'm just kind of like, you know, I can ride and stuff, but I'm not those sort of guys. And I got to that start line, and not only am I dealing with this kind of stuff that, I don't belong here, man. I'm like out of my depth. I mean, I'm at the Dakar Rally. This is crazy. And along with that,
I've stop you there for a minute. Your regional races in South Africa, you did pretty well. You podiumed. You were like second place in a big Moto race, right?
Yeah, that's years ago. But it was one of those where I felt out of my depth. And
well, you're on the wrong side of 40, and you've been paralyzed, and
yeah. And I'm thinking like, man, what am I doing here? And it was kind of like, yeah, this is just crazy. And when those trucks pass you for the first time, I mean, guys had told me about trucks racing at Dakar, and you think you know how scary it is. But that first time that truck comes past you, and it's like a 2-story building whooshing past you, it's just insane, you know. And you realize like, whoa, this is mental. And it was like, I looked at this, and by the end of, I can tell you, I remember clearly at the end of day 3, I was so physically and mentally exhausted. I'd been leaving in the dark in the morning, getting in the dark in the evening, having like 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night. I was destroyed at the end of day 3. And I'm like, I'm out of this race. There's no ways I can do 13 days when I feel like this at day 3. I felt as I thought I would feel at the end of the race. But what I did is I decided I would do what I did in the hospital, which was I couldn't face my whole life being paralyzed. That was like, man, that was such a massive weight to try and bear. And if you think about it, you just can't do it. But you break it down into months, into weeks, into days. And there were some days in that hospital where I'd be like, I'm just going to get through this next physio session, or I'm just going to get to lunchtime, and sometimes it was like the next 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. And that's what I did on the race. I said, right, I'm going to just get through one more day. And sometimes it was one more stage. And I remember there was one stage in particular that was so brutal. I was like 10 more meters, and that was on day 4, 10 more meters. And I have like a little strategy which I've used racing enduro. Someone gave me the advice once that you only stop where you can pull off. And so there was a lot of guys just burning out motors and stuff, getting stuck in the dunes and stuff. And I would pick a little dunette, sometimes 10 or 15 meters ahead, and I'd go, right, we're going to get to that one, because the sand was terribly soft and it was all churned up from the trucks and stuff. And I'd just get on that gas and I'd go bop and just stop on top of that little dune, just with my front wheel over the top. And I'd turn off the bike and I'd wait, and I'd pick another spot and I'd go boom, 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 from these spots to spots, taking forever. But I just kind of hacked my way through. And suddenly I had day 4 in the bag. And then I had day 5 in the bag as these little bits added up, and day 6, and suddenly you hit rest day and you're like, halfway, I made it to La Paz. This is fantastic. And then just slowly started ticking it through, just day at a time, kilometer at a time.
Sorry about that. I got a call. I should put my phone on my daughter.
And I just kept just ticking away, and just started adding up the days, and yeah, got all the way to day 12 or 13, and that is when the whole thing just fell apart.
But before you got there, you had some moments in the Dakar. Like one time, it was a very narrow section of road. So describe how the alarms work when you hear the beep. And you look back, and the 300 meters behind you is a big truck coming at twice your speed.
Yeah. The trucks are faster than most of the bikers. And especially in certain terrains, they're a lot faster. And the way it works is in every truck and car, they've got transponders installed. And on every bike, there's an alarm. And so what happens is the car or the truck, they start behind the bikes in the morning. And so during the morning and during the day, they catch a lot of the bikers. And when they see a biker in the distance, they press that button in their car or their truck, and it sends off an alarm on your bike. So you're riding along, and this alarm on your bike goes off, just did like this, and you got a little screen, and on that screen it says car or truck. And what you do as a biker is you turn around and you see that guy, and he's normally 200-300 meters back, and you look for a place on the track where you can pull over, and you pull over to the side and you stop, and this car or truck just comes past, just whoa. And kicks out the roost out the back of those things like half bricks and stuff. I'm sure guys who have raced Baja and these kind of races, they'll know what the cars and trucks are like, and they just kick out all this roost, and you go completely invisible in this dust cloud. And that's why it's important you're off the track, because sometimes there's 2 or 3 vehicles in a row, and you wait for that dust to clear. You look down the track, you make sure there isn't another car, and you get back in that track and off you go racing again. And yeah, it's probably the scariest thing you can have happen to you, because as guys know, 90% or 99% of all the racing we do as motorbike riders is just bikes. Sometimes you might race with quads at the most, but suddenly you're racing against 2-ton cars and 8-ton trucks. It's mental,
Yeah. So you described one in particular where the road was too narrow and it had a high wall, and you just had to press yourself against the wall.
Yeah, it was actually, they graded like rocks. So it was like all rocks, the size of soccer balls and stuff. And what they'd done is they'd graded this road through this environment, and they'd like pulled all the rocks to the side. So the rocks were standing, sort of a meter, even a meter and a half in places, and they were just piled up like this. But it was, it felt to me like it was a single lane, which would be tight in a car. And I'm racing along, and this alarm goes off. And I turn around and I see this truck, and he's a couple 100 meters back. But I can see this track is going on for kilometers. And so I'm hammering it down for as long as I can till I get to the point where I'm like, I've got to now stop. He's caught me. He needs to overtake me. I've got to get out the way. But there's nowhere to go. You can't get out of this area, and after that thing, it's just rock, and on a rally bike that's 180 kilograms. And so I came to the side, and I just stopped, and I remember leaning my bike up against this rock wall or pile of rocks kind of thing, and looking across to the other side of the track, at the other side, and going like, there's not enough space there for a truck. It just wasn't enough. And I remember as this truck came, I breathed out and I flattened myself up against these rocks, and I was regretting all those large pizzas I'd eaten, and I just kind of got as thin as I could and pushed myself, and this truck came past me, and can I tell you, these crazy Russian and Dutch guys, they don't slow down for anything, man, and he just straight past me like this, and it was just, it was one of those where you just, it was pretty damn scary.
You said in the book you were waiting to go towards the light.
Yeah, that's it. I could hear my granddad calling me, I was like, here we go.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And You were also thanking yourself for losing the 10 kilograms or whatever you lost to get to the race.
Absolutely. I think that's what saved me that day.
To get into race shape. Yeah, holy cow. So what happened next is what you actually opened the book with. You had quite a cliffhanger when you opened the book. It's like, holy shit, wait, this doesn't make any sense. What I just read doesn't align with what my expectations are, knowing that he finished the car. That doesn't, what's up with this? And then, of course, you have to read the whole book to find out what happens. Yeah. So you were about to tell that story, I think.
Sure, yeah. So it's the second last day. It's day 12 of 13. And I'd had problems on day 11. I'd actually, I think it was the day that I buckled my wheel, and there was all sorts of challenges. And so I ended up...
Right. You were riding with torn ligaments in your right knee, right?
Yeah, that was left knee, and that happened on day 4. That happened on day 4. So I rode most of the race with those torn ligaments, but I had some other challenges. I think it was the guys will have to read it, but I had some challenges on day 11, and so I actually finished day 11 close to last, and so I started day 12 last. So I'm stone last in the race, and off we go. And mid-morning, we entered into a semi-arid, like, desert section. And there was a lot of fish and that kind of stuff. And there was these twin tracks, like a Jeep track that wound its way through. And what had happened is over the years, those tracks had got deeper and deeper. So it was like 2 parallel ruts running through this area. But the ruts were filled with fish. So as bikers, we know that it's so difficult to ride in that type of terrain because you've got a little bit of vegetation here and there. So and the center island is so steep, you can't ride the center island. So you pretty much got to just pick a rut and stay in that rut. And so I was in this left-hand rut, and I'm riding along as fast as I can, but you can only do 50 or 60 k's now because it's hard to see the ruts with all the fish. But obviously the cars and trucks with 4 wheels, those guys just come flying through. It was one of those sections where they were doing double the speed of the bikers. And I'm racing along in this left-hand rut, and my alarm goes off. And it's just like, and I turned around expecting to see this car, 200 or 300 meters back. But he's like 20, 30 meters back, and he's doing more than double my speed. And I realized that I've literally got about 2 or 3 seconds to get out of his way. And he's expecting me just to swerve off to the side. And I saw this guy, and I turn around and I just swing the bars over to just swerve into the bushes. And as I do this, it's at a spot where the rut is particularly deep. And so that front wheel just drags up against the inside of that rut, unable to climb out. And you know what it's like when you've committed your weight already and your bike's staying in the rut. It's kind of like going against a curve on your bicycle, and you kind of like going over and you can't stop. And this guy's on me, and I just dived off this bike, and I just hear crunch, and this guy crashes straight into the back of my bike and completely rides right over the motorcycle. And I can't believe this. And he missed me by just centimeters. And I'm on my knees there. I'm like turning around on the ground. I'm on my knees. The dust is clearing. I'm seeing this bike in front of me. And the guy stopped just about 30 meters up, and the navigator stood up the car, and he gives me a thumbs up, standing there, kind of 1 foot in the car still. And I'm like, no, freaking come back, man. And he got back in that car, and off he went. And I couldn't believe it. Yeah, man, I tell you what, I was thinking of, I'm going to chop this guy up and bury him in the desert, man. I can't even tell you, I was seething, It was this 10-year journey that got me to the start of that race. And on day 12 of 13, and I'm out of this race. And my bike's destroyed, and I'm also thinking about the cost of all of this, and I can't believe it. And now there's obviously going to be more cars and stuff coming, so I drag that bike out of that track, and I stand it up, and the bike's destroyed. The frame was bent, the subframe was all bent. There's 3 petrol tanks on the bike. 2 of the petrol tanks completely destroyed. All the petrol's run out. The foot peg is sheared off the frame, so it's broken the frame off. So parts of the frame are still attached to the foot peg. The whole exhaust is completely flattened and bent up into the back wheel. All the back of the bike is all torn, and all the brakes and everything, all the brake lights and everything, all the wiring. The bars are bent. The triple clamps were bent. The bike's just stuffed, just completely done, and I can't believe it. And I just stood there, it just in disbelief, and I'm alone in the middle of nowhere. I'm stone lost. There's no other bikes behind me, and I'm out of this race. Day 12 or 13, and it was just, it just felt like just so unfair, man. Like this is just so wrong on every level, especially after enduring 11 days to get that far. And I pulled out my set.
I think Meredith said later, it's just how cruel life can be.
Yeah. And I thought about Meredith, and I thought, she's going to see me stone lost, she's tracking the race, and she's going to see me stopped, not hitting another waypoint. And I know she's going to get worried, as the time ticks away and she sees me not coming through a waypoint, she's going to be like, something's happened. And after our history, she has every right to think that. And I think I've got to tell her I'm out the race. And I carry a satellite phone, and I pulled up my sat phone, and I phoned her up, and she answered, and I was like, the first thing I said was, I'm not injured, because she's used to getting that call, and I said, but this is what's happened, and I'm out of the race, and she just cried, and I like to say that it was the fish in my eyes that made my eyes water, but we stood there just thousands of kilometers apart, and we just cried together. It was just so cruel. It was what a way to end. And I hung up the phone, and I looked at this bike, and having raced a few rallies, that the thing with rally is you're only out when you miss your start time the next day. And I decided that I know I'm out of this race. I had 660 kilometers to still race that day. There's nothing I can do, but I decided I'm only out at 4:00 tomorrow morning when I miss that start time, and I'm not going to quit before then. Wherever I am, if I push this bike, that's what we're doing. And so I started trying to fix the bike, and I disconnected all the wiring and stuff, because I was so worried it was going to spark and the whole bike catch on fire because it was all full of fuel. I stripped the whole exhaust off the bike. I disconnected the petrol tanks that were damaged. I had to strip some of the bottom ICO off and everything, just so the bars could turn, because the whole tower had broken off and bent back into the bars and everything. And I stripped that off, and I got the bars to turn, and I got the bike working without an exhaust, without, with bent bars, with no navigation. And the road book was just completely mangled. And all the tower, all the carbon fiber and everything. But I got it working. But I couldn't ride in that track anymore, especially with one foot peg. You know what it's like riding in a rut. It's you need your foot pegs. And so I just kind of zigzagged through the bushes, keeping the track in sight to my left. Every now and again, a car or a truck would come past, and I'd watch them in the distance as far as I could, and just aim for that point on the horizon. And I just ticked away a few kilometers. And as I'm riding,
waiting for your petrol to run out.
Exactly. I had just a few liters of fuel left. The next place I hit civilization was 65 kilometers away, and I got enough fuel for like 25 Ks. Maybe I'm wasting my time. I'm out of this race. I know I'm being foolish. I know I'm out. I know I'm just pushing back the inevitable. I'm like a dead man walking, and I just kept ticking away, accepting this fact that I'm out and the cruelness of it, and thinking what I'm going to do to that car driver when I find him. And yeah, it just all felt like it was over.
And then a mirage in the desert. You can't make this stuff up.
I tell you what, I don't know if I say it in the book, but it didn't even occur to me at first when it happened what was happening. Because I'm riding along, and suddenly there's a bike just standing there in the middle of the semi-arid desert, a KTM 450 rally replica, exactly the same bike as mine, just standing there in the desert. And at first I saw it and I was like, oh, that's terrible, man. Someone's crashed or obviously been medevaced out. That's wait a minute. And suddenly it kind of like just dawned on me, and I pulled up to this bike, and there was three guys there, Argentinian guys, on old dirt bikes, just kind of spectating in the middle of nowhere, and they can't speak English, but they've kind of explained that the guy had broken his arms and he's been medevaced out in the chopper. Now, when they medevac the guy out, they take all the tracking equipment off the bike and they put it with the rider when they put them in the chopper. So here's this bike with all the tracking equipment stripped off it. So I know the rider's out the race, and that bike's going to stay there until the sweeper truck comes and picks the bike up. But the thing is the rules of Dakar is I can't ride that bike, but I can use parts from that bike. And I mean, I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa, man. We know how to borrow stuff. And so I decided that's what we're going to do. And these three guys, they helped me, and we stripped the whole exhaust off that bike. And we there were so many things that as bikers, the guys will appreciate this. I mean, we siphoned the petrol out of that bike, and it is so quick just to strip a tank off the side of that bike. But you are so tired. You are so exhausted. It is so hard to think straight that you just do dumb things. I mean, we stripped the whole exhaust off. We put the whole exhaust onto my bike. Then we stripped the whole side of that frame off with the whole foot peg holder and everything. Went to my bike, realized we've got to strip the whole exhaust off again to get that part on, to then get the exhaust back on. So we did like stuff twice. We siphoned the petrol out, and we got my bike working. And I mean, to cut a long story short, we got it going. I still needed all the navigation equipment and things, but we were just so out of time. I've still got to try and make it in by 4 the next morning. And at this point, I was 4 hours behind the guy who was second last. So it's going to be touch and go still for 4 a.m. And so I had to go, and I just started riding, and I took the road book. I would tear about 5 or 6 tulips off, and I'd look at these 5 or 6 tulips, and I'd fold it up, put it in my pocket. I'd ride, I'd stop, pull some more out, and like that, and I just ticked my way along. And then it got dark, and I would pull out these tulips, look at them with a torch, and go on and just tick my way through that day, through the night. And man, riding alone in South America in the middle of the night is pretty damn scary. And we rode through some mountain passes, crossed some rivers, and crossing rivers at night on your own is man, that was some pretty crazy stuff. And
you just said we in that sentence, but you meant you, right?
Oh yeah, no, I was alone.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I talk to myself a lot, so I think sometimes that's the we. But I just kept ticking my way that night, and at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, I was still riding. 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and I got to the end of the special, and there was no one there. They'd packed up, they'd gone home hours ago, and I could see because I'd got one of my ICOs working, and so I could see by my ICO because it reset as I hit that waypoint. So I know I'm at the right place. At the end of the special, there's no finish line, there's no marshals. So I just kept riding and just got onto the liaison, which was a fairly short liaison, and I rode and got to the pits. And at the pits, at the bivouac, is my teammate Walter de Blanche. He'd gone out on day 4 with a burnt out clutch, and he was waiting for me at 2:15 in the morning at the gate of the bivouac, Walter de Blanche, and he climbed on the back of the bike, and we rode into those pits together, and it was just it was a crazy special thing. That's
crazy. Just the most insane thing I've ever heard. I think that's part of what makes the book so great. So we're a little over time, but we want to hear the end. I don't know how many spoilers you want to give. You've given a lot. So
yeah.
Somehow it leads up to a medal on the finishing podium of Dakar, and that big shit-eating grin of yours.
Oh man, it was it was crazy. But I mean, the next day was all full of craziness and falling asleep on the bike, and it was a lot of liaison that last day, and all sorts of like stuff I went through. But something that I think is worth mentioning is that I had 1 hour of sleep that night, and I had a choice when I got into that bivouac that I could sleep for an hour, or I could go and fill out an incident report form, go and submit it all, and go and say what's happened, and find out who this other driver is, and tell him what he'd done, and kind of get my justice and all that stuff. But I chose to sleep, and I slept that 1 hour, and I rode that last day, and I finished that Dakar, and I crossed that finishing podium, and that was something that was a big lesson in my life, because that last day when I rode, I thought about this incident, and I thought about what had happened, and I thought, because I still don't know who that guy was, and I thought about it, and I thought, man, out of this incredible journey, for that guy to go over my bike on the second last day was one of the best things that's ever happened in my life, because he gave me such an awesome ending to this crazy story. And so as I rode, I just thought, you know what, it doesn't matter who he is. He'll live with what he's done, and for me to get revenge or whatever is just, it's a waste for both of us. And so I left it, and I never found out who it was, and still to this day I don't know who it is, and I'm cool with that. And so we finished, we got a medal, we came home to my awesome wife Meredith and my 4 daughters and my mates at the airport, and it was just incredible.
You remind me of one of the greatest life lessons of my life, I think. A couple of people have told me in the past that there are 3 things you can focus on in life: personal grievance, personal ambition, or the mission. Focus on the mission. It's the best way to solve the other 2. And terrible things are going to happen to you. Things that are so unfair and cruel and everything else. Just focus on the mission. You got to get the personal grievance out of your mind. Just focus on the mission. And it feels to me like that's kind of what you went through. You were just livid and wanted to carve this guy up. And then you thought, yeah, but the mission is to get on the podium, finish Dakar. How is it even? And then you got totally absorbed in that. And the mission was getting an hour's sleep, not doing some personal grievance thing, filling out paperwork and all that. And I just think it's one of the greatest life lessons. I've tried to tell that to my sons and daughter. And so, anything else, Joey? This has just been fantastic. I mean,
oh man,
reading your book is fantastic. Watching the eco race videos that Lyndon put together was fantastic, even though the camel thing happened, but that made the story better. And this has just been amazing.
That was crazy, and I'm sorry for just jibber jabbering away. I get carried away with it all and things, but for the guys out there watching, man, the book's there. It's for free. You can download the audio version, on your guys' website and listen to it during lockdown. And I just hope that it gives guys encouragement to carry on. Everybody's carrying a load. Everybody's dealing with something in their lives. And especially now, there's all sorts of financial impacts. There's all sorts of family impacts and friends. And, we worry about our folks and all sorts of stuff, in this type of things. And so, man, I hope you guys get strength from it. And there's a lot more in it than we can cover in this time. And so I hope you enjoy it. And it gives you some perspective and keeps you chasing your own goals and dreams.
Thank you so much. I also should thank Paul, who put this together and showed the pictures in the video. I assume you guys saw. I couldn't see them on my machine.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you, Paul. And David Rudolph, who keeps ADV Rider going and who was just diagnosed as a survivor of COVID.
Oh, wow.
He had a bad sickness and felt terrible, and his parents are doctors, and he and I were texting back and forth, and I said, dude, it sure sounds like you might have. And he got the lab test back yesterday, and he had it. He's got the antibodies for it now. So good on him for surviving. For people who like this, please it'll help our channel, and subscribe so you get notified for other ones. And we'll see you next time.
Betcha.